Hey, all you beautiful Ethic cuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think changing our workplaces can change our world, I got a real treat for you today. Before we get started here, please drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. Drop a note in from where you're coming from. I love the Ethicsverse. It's such a shot in the arm every Thursday for me, seeing where all of us from around the world care so much about our workplaces, how we can be more impactful, how we can really move the needle in our programs. Today, we're going to be talking about drop the word, not the work, why DEI is still essential. In today's climate, these discussions about DEI have been very entangled. It's a very polarizing thing. So I always want the Ethicsverse to be something that is nonpartisan. Half of us voted red, half of us voted blue, half of us, or me, been writing in Ralph Nader for the last 4 or 5 elections. So I want today to really be something that is not polarizing, but rather something that is healing and something that is insightful for us, regardless of which side of the aisle we are on, because our job is to really ride the waves. The waves keep coming. We can't control those waves. And the more we can understand about the other perspective, the more we can understand about our workforce that we're trying to influence, the more impactful we can be. So I want these questions today to be coming in. We're going to work those into the conversation. And we got a couple of announcements. Please keep these things coming. Please keep your LinkedIn URLs coming in the chat. You got to expand that network. Like we say every single week, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. We just came off a phenomenal time in DC at Compliance Week. So many great highlights. I'll be doing a video talking about some of those highlights, but we got to see so many great friends, so many of my heroes in the compliance space. It kicked off with a great brunch, a great women's brunch, which we were able to sponsor, where the one and only Lisa Fine and the one and only Hema Lomax shared so many insights about how to be a better guide, how to not be a hero or a villain within our organization, but how to be a guide and how to really build our network. You know, a lot of us in this space are introverts, and sometimes it's hard to kind of get over the hump and, raise our hand or knock on the door, so to speak, to get an answer. But, you get no bonus points for reinventing the wheel. And hopefully the Ethicsverse can be a place every single week where you can, stop yourself from reinventing that wheel. Lisa Fine won this phenomenal award as Mentor of the Year. The award show was so great. It was so cool to be in DC at this historical hotel, the Mayflower, around all these people that looked at the world the same way, exchanging ideas, exchanging notes on how to really kind of, navigate through this difficult, time of a lot of volatility. Of course, we had the best booth again. Not my words. I was just told that also. We had a bunch of great sessions. We talked about compliance being redefined. If you guys are interested and you have not seen the study that Ethico did alongside Angie Gorman at FTI, drop a 1 in the chat and we'll go ahead and send that over. And then also, back to the award show, the one and only Ellen Hunt, somebody who's been so good to me, so good to our company, is such a pillar of our community. She won a Lifetime Achievement Award. So a round of applause for Ellen Hunt. It was really awesome. I'm coming out of this. I'm coming out of our time in DC more excited than ever about the impact that ethics and compliance can have on our organizations, how building a true culture of integrity can really unlock so much potential in our workforce. We're going to be talking about that some more today. I got a couple more quick announcements. I'd love to break another emoji record. I, of course, have not had lunch yet. You got to hunt hungry around here. I want to share, of course, the Ethical Library. We gave out over 100 books. We only had one person try to steal 5 or 6 books. We vaudeville hooked them back and had them only pick one, but we gave out hundreds of books, a bunch of t-shirts. It was really a great session. So if you are not feeding your mind with new information, if you're not exposing yourself to podcasts like the Unlast podcast or the Great Women in Compliance podcast, or the new podcast series that me and Tom Fox are doing all about how you can use AI to really push your program forward, then you're leaving a lot of impact on the table. You got to feed that brain of yours to really take advantage of this 4-pound nuclear reactor you have between your ears. Also, check out the Ethics Experts podcast, fastest growing ethics and compliance podcast in the world, top 2% global podcast, which is so encouraging that people care so much about business ethics. We had a great episode recently with Barry Parsons. If you have not checked that out, 2x that when you're walking your dog or doing your dishes. I guarantee you're going to get some great gems. And you know what? Dive back through that catalog. Every single one of these episodes is really chock full of great insights from people who are on the front lines, people who have built programs, who have have dealt with the challenges that you're likely facing. We just want to keep pouring out Ethico. We just want to keep pouring out value into this marketplace, because what got us here is not going to get us there. We really have the opportunity for the next 10 years to be significantly different than the last 10 years, where we are where we have been viewed as the Office of No or the anti-business department. These forward programs, these forward moving programs, the people that are on the ethics experts have built really have started to bend the curve and move into that trusted advisor position, where we're getting brought in sooner, where we're getting the resources we need, and so forth. We did a session about moving the needle at Compliance Week about ROI. We put together this phenomenal toolkit about how to be more persuasive and how to start quantifying across 20 different aspects, how to start quantifying what our impact is. If we don't have the confidence to come to those conversations with leadership, with the board, with the CFO to get the resources we need, if we're not bringing the confidence into those conversations, the odds of us getting what we need are basically zero. So we're going to be having an Ethicsverse day coming up where we're going to have some really long sessions. If you're interested in this, let's drop a 0 in the chat so we can see what kind of interest this is. But we'll be going through persuasion, we'll be going through ROI, and then we'll be diving deep on how to make the ends meet and being more persuasive and doing these calculations that can seem so intimidating. So I'm really hoping to see 1,000 ones in the chat here, because I'm really excited about that. What I'm also really excited about is the ecosystem. Our company is growing faster than anybody else, and it's not because we're so smart or because that might be, I'm just kidding. It's not because we're so smart. It's because we're getting great insights from people on the front lines, and we're pouring a bunch of money into our software platform. Because what we found is that when smart people who care have the right tools, they can drive more engagement, they can build a more effective program, and they can drive more efficiency, which is all going to drop directly down to the bottom line. Cost center is in the eye of the beholder. And so if we're viewed as a cost center, we're probably not interacting with the business in the right way, and we're not showing our value and showing our worth in the right way. So part of that is having a tool, and part of that is, back to that Ethicsverse session that we're going to be doing in a couple weeks. If I see enough zeros here, okay? Pamela, 1s are for the study, 0s are to, show that you want to do you want us to do this full day session about really kind of calculating this ROI thing in detail. The reason we're going to do that is because our Compliance Week session was supposed to be, a 3-hour workshop, and due to some changes, we had to kind of condense it down to 1 hour. So we really only started to scratch the surface. So if you missed the conference in DC, not to worry. I'll look at all those zeros. I love it. We're going to do it. So if you missed the conference in DC, don't worry. That was a mere preview for the in-depth discussion that we're going to be doing. So if you are back to the Ethico platform, if you are stuck with, or you're with one of these legacy providers, these status quo providers like Navex or Conversant/EQS, and you're looking for something better, and you just want to kind of see what else is out there, hit us up. Go to our website and ask for a demo, or drop a 9 in the chat. How's this? I'm just throwing out so many numbers. Drop a 9 in the chat, and someone can reach out to you for a no pitch stone demo, just so you can see what's out there. This Promised Land promotion, which we're carrying through Q2, is up to a year free, to really de-risk that budget impact, to de-risk that that risk of moving over. This is such a public tool. In many cases, it can kind of drive a lot of anxiety for making that move. But again, the status quo is not going to help get you to the top of the mountain. What got us here is not going to get us there. We are giving away a great book today. We're giving away 5 of these babies, Subtle Acts of Exclusion. This book is a non-judgmental book about how can we look. We'll be talking about this some more, but when our workforce doesn't feel included, when people don't feel like they are safe to put their gifts to work, well, then guess what? They're not going to put their gifts to work. We as human beings are wired for self-preservation. We have that self-preservation instinct, and our job is really to create these cultures of integrity where people feel proud to come to work, who feel proud to put their gifts to work toward that business, your business's mission. And that is when those are the circumstances that really allow us to show our worth a lot more. So we're going to be giving away 5 of these. Of course, any winner is going to get access to any of the books in the Ethico library. We want to, like I say every week, I don't even like making money around here. I just like giving away books. Also wanted to shout out Andrew McBride. He had a phenomenal session. He has a great business called Integrity Bridge, where he won Program of the Year last year at Compliance Week, and he has started a business helping compliance officers build better programs, do program assessments, and figure out how to get things unstuck. If you know Andrew's story, or if you don't know Andrew's story, you should check it out. We had a great almost 2-hour episode with him recently. For I think it was episode 200 on the ethics experts, and he is just like such a wealth of knowledge. So he's someone that I've learned so much from, and someone who has added so much to our community. He's going to be at Compliance in the Age of AI conference on June 12th and 13th. This is a really cool conference with some great speakers. Reed Blackman's going to be there. So if you are in the area or you want to get smarter on AI, I would really encourage you to check this out. There's an Ethico 50, because we love you, an Ethico 50 promotion there as well. All right. With that, I want to welcome, let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Michael Barron. How's it going, Michael?
Good. How are you, Nick? Really happy to be here with you, with your community.
Yeah, man, it's great to have you. You've been on a couple times. You're somebody who has a really unique perspective on how we can really unlock a lot of this potential inside of our organization. So as always, we want to keep those questions coming. Please, push those into the chat, and we will interweave them into our discussion here today. But Michael, why don't we kick off with, let's kind of start to frame out. Let's start to frame out this discussion, and maybe you can kind of remind our viewers who you are and how you got into this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, everyone. So I started first getting passionate about what we now call DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Long time ago, got inspired, and then had all these questions, right? Like everybody's talking about unconscious bias. Well, like, how does that happen? Why does it happen? We have these biases in our heads that we don't know are there, and we don't even want to be there. How does that really happen? How do cultures make some people feel really included and valued, and other people not so much, but in these very subtle ways? So I went and got a doctorate in cultural anthropology and cognitive psychology, because I knew part of that had to do with the way our minds work, and part of that had to do with this thing called culture and how those things interact. And then ever since then, I did some teaching in higher ed, but have been working with organizations for the last 18 years, helping them figure out how to create more inclusive spaces for everyone, how to create more inclusive leaders, how to build cultures where everyone feels valued, all of that wonderful stuff. My company is called Iris Inclusion. Actually, I'm in Maryland. I saw at least one person was from Maryland on there, so I was happy to see that. And I live on an iris flower farm, which is about to bloom in about a week. So really excited about that. My wife does that farming. She's got about 300 different varieties of iris flowers. They're pretty incredible.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I got into this space. A few years ago, published this book, which is being given away, called Subtle Acts of Exclusion, with a co-author, Dr. Tiffany Jana. And what we were finding, right, is that there were these buzzwords in the DEI space that were getting in the way of doing the really good work that we wanted to do. And one of those was microaggressions, right? We'd go and try to do microaggressions trainings, and sometimes we couldn't even get past the word microaggression. And here's why. There are these examples, right? If you were with me on the last session I did here, you know these. But take an example of a blind man is trying to get down the hallway, and you want to get out of his way as much as possible. So you sort of silently flatten yourself up against the wall, try to let him pass smoothly without incident. And then someone comes along and says, hey, that's a microaggression, because it actually makes him feel not normal and not valued. And that's something that a blind man said to me. And so you start to think, wait, I was just trying to be helpful. I wasn't trying to be aggressive. So you get real defensive about that word, right? And then the other part of that word is micro, which kind of tells everyone this is not a big deal, a real small thing. And so that sparked Tiffany and I getting together and saying, there's got to be a different way to talk about these subtle things that are happening, that are getting in the way of inclusion for people, that are getting in the way of our cultures. And so let's reframe this whole topic. That's what led to the writing of that book, Subtle Acts of Exclusion, which just put out a second edition, all updated and with some case studies a couple years ago. So really excited to be here and talk about this topic, which is so important right now. And I know we've got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we got a lot to cover and we got a lot to talk about. And, you know, on either side of this issue, if you're on either side of this issue, from what I've seen, there's kind of a lack of understanding about the other side of the issue. And I find valid points on both sides. And so what I'd like today to be is really one, you know, a discussion about, you know, more understanding. If you are, you know, inherently against DEI because of how you've seen it described or how you've seen it sort of pushed out in your organization, or you're on the other side of it and you feel like it's being kind of dismantled right now and it's a travesty. I think we can't, this now is not the time if we are going to be true enablers of greatness in our organization and we're, you know, arbiters of the culture of integrity that really does unlock that potential. Now is not the time to sort of turn into, you know, warring tribes, but rather it's time to try to seek understanding and understand these different perspectives. Because I've seen a lot of organizations get caught up in what I call big D diversity, which is kind of the clip art diversity, the United Colors of Benetton ad, where they think that they're able to get kind of that small d diversity, the true diversity of thought, the true, you know, culture where people feel comfortable sharing these diverse perspectives, where an idea meritocracy can really take bloom like a field of flowers. Okay, how do you like that? Where this idea meritocracy can really kind of take root and bloom forward to really drive that best idea. So that's kind of the big frame for today as we walk or as we balance directly on the middle of the fence here. But Michael, why don't we start out by kind of providing a big picture in case some attendees don't know what's going on right now in this space.
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to unpack there. And what I'm hoping, I'm going to foreshadow what I'm hoping. I'm hoping by the end of this, we don't see two sides to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We may have two sides in terms of who we voted for in this past election, but I'm hoping we get to a place where we see that what is actually happening in the field of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is something that I think we are all going to agree on. And in fact, research shows the majority of Americans do believe in that work. What's happened is the term itself has gotten very polarizing. So let's start out just making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what are we talking about, right? DEI is a relatively new acronym for the kind of work going on in organizations, in schools, that started because people, well, let's define it first. The D, right, stands for diversity. It's basically a description. Who do we have in the room in terms of all the different dimensions that make up our identity? Who do we have on the team? Who do we have in the organization? That's what diversity is, right? Equity is about fairness of outcome. And then inclusion is a feeling, right? Inclusion is when everyone feels welcomed, valued, heard, supported, understood, right? So that's what we're talking about. There was a recognition by companies that we were running into some trouble in organizations, right? We had a lot of bias and not meritocracy. So much bias that it was leading to basically kind of the opposite of DEI, right? It was leading to homogeneity, inequity, and exclusion. And so people tried to figure out what kind of work can we do to try to turn that around, right? To make it so we don't have bias in our workplaces, to make it so that everyone feels inclusion rather than exclusion, to make it so everyone is set up for success and to thrive, to make it so everyone is free from discrimination and from harm, right? And I bet most folks would agree with those sorts of things. So then the acronym has changed over the years, right? First it was just diversity, and then it was diversity and inclusion. Lately it's become DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But that's the basic idea. And so what we've got going on now in this particular moment is a pretty coordinated attack on DEI, right? An attack on the work that is being done to create that inclusion and equity for everyone. And what I think is going on is a lot of misinformation. It sort of makes me think about, it also has become, just the acronym itself has become this sort of third rail, very polarizing term. When we spell it out, we usually get a lot more agreement. But the term itself has become this polarizing term, even if people don't exactly know about the work that's being done. I was doing ages ago, it makes me think of this. I was doing research on what did regular folks think about the Obamacare that was being proposed, right? So I would ask people, what do you think of Obamacare? And lots of people said, I love it, I'm excited about it. And lots of people said, I hate it, it's horrible. Then I would follow up with, what are some things being proposed in Obamacare? And then we got a lot of blank stares on both sides. Well, I'm not exactly sure what it is, right? And then I would say, well, okay, what do you think of the Affordable Care Act? And then almost everyone said, yeah, that's great. I love the Affordable Care Act. Don't like Obamacare, right? So we've got sort of a term framing issue going on as well, where there's a lot. So for example, right, real diversity, equity, and inclusion work in organizations is all about removing barriers so that we can have a real meritocracy. So everyone gets included in the hiring process. There's a standardized process so that everyone gets the same chance to get hired or promoted or whatever it is, and that we get inclusion from all different sectors of the population, removing the barriers so we can have a real meritocracy. But it gets mischaracterized, as if it were the opposite of that, as if it was creating barriers for certain people, as if it was getting in the way of meritocracy. And so that's why we've got a lot of misinformation and a lot of attacks going on, a lot of lawsuits, a lot of executive orders. January 21st, 22nd, we had executive orders banning DEI work in federal organizations. So federal agencies had to stop all their DEI work. Then there were threats also to organizations that got funding from the federal government. They had to stop their DEI work. And so we've got this situation now where maybe more than ever, we need the work to make sure that everyone in an organization is feeling included and valued and respected. And yet we've got these attacks making it so that whether it's a federal agency or a private company, I mean, federal agencies, they had to stop what they were doing, but a lot of private companies did too, because they were worried about potentially losing, privileges, losing funding, potential lawsuits by the government for the work that they were doing. So we've got this sort of push and pull right now in terms of, can this work continue to happen? You've got a bunch of organizations that are standing up saying, we are going to continue to do this work. Recently, it was Coca-Cola and Pfizer and Levi Strauss. And first it was Costco and Disney. Lots of organizations saying, this is who we are. We're going to continue this work. And then some that have backpedaled and
so
kind of quietly. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just think, I think people respond to incentives, and to be fair, I think there's not like a standard for DEI, right? Like what you described was
Totally.
like a very sort of, there's a lot of purity in what you described, right? We want to create a fair workplace. We want people to have opportunities in pursuit of exactly what you said, a true meritocracy. Okay, great. But there's a lot of ham-handed, I'll say it there. I said it. There's a lot of ham-handed applications of DEI, and there's not like a standard out there. Like, in our pre-show, you kind of gave this example of, is a DEI consultant good? And it's like, that's like asking the question is like, is a restaurant good? Well, some are good and some are bad. And I think if we're creating a true environment of inclusivity, well, then that means it's inclusive for everyone. There's a great comment in the chat here from Dana. Thank you for this, Dana. She said, not to minimize the topic, we've had some training that assumed my bias from the start, which itself was offensive. That's not inclusive of that group of people. So thinking caution in the training is the comment. And I think, if we can tear back, if we can tear away maybe something that felt, offensive to sit through, like a training that felt, offensive to sit through, or tear through the polarizing politicalization of, this term, we can really get down to the essence of it, which I don't think anybody on this call, regardless of how they voted, can argue with. We want to create a workplace that people feel safe in, that people feel like their voice can be heard, regardless of what that voice is, or regardless of that position is. Because if we don't, then we run the risk of this big D diversity. And I was talking to a friend and somebody who's really become a mentor for me, and he does a lot of coaching with businesses, and he was brought into a company that, man, if you took a picture of that boardroom, he was like, this was the most diverse thing ever. You could check all those boxes off. They had all these different races and orientations, present there. But he said there was no actual diversity there. So just, doing that achieving the clip art diversity, or kind of, swinging that like DEI hammer, doesn't generate what that outcome that is intended necessarily, which is the true diversity, to say, hey, you have a different opinion than I do, but we together can, combine to find that right answer.
Yeah, I love, there are two things in what you said that I think are super important. One is that idea of standards, and that's very true. I mean, not everyone who is doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work is doing it to the same level of standard, is doing it in the way that I would suggest it be done. And we don't have common standards to measure whether that is happening. So a lot of organizations, they want to maybe bring in an outside consultant to help them figure out how to do this work better. And where do you go to figure out who really knows what they're talking about? Who is able to do this in a way that is not going to be polarizing, that is going to call everyone into the topic, that's going to do it in a way that is not performative, but that really makes a difference. And so that's important. So if the question is, should we all get together, including everyone in the field of DEI, and put our heads together to figure out how to do this work better and create even more standards? I'm all for it, right? And then this idea of performative DEI, which I agree, it happens. I mean, it was one of the most frustrating things coming out of the murder of George Floyd, for example. A lot of organizations making bold statements, or putting certain pictures up on their website to try to act like they had a certain diversity that maybe they didn't. There was a lot of performative work happening, and not necessarily transformative work that was really changing the day-to-day of who we are as an organization and how we operate in this way that is fair and inclusive for everyone. And so no one is in support of that performative work. And in fact, that was one of the most frustrating things to DEI practitioners themselves, is when an organization didn't really care about the results, or their actions didn't match their words. That was a huge, I think we all agree, including those of us in the field, that is not the goal, right?
Well, and the same thing happened with ESG. Remember, every freaking webinar was all about ESG, and that got totally hijacked, and it turned it into this performative thing. And my friend Allison Taylor, who wrote that phenomenal book, some of you may have won on the Ethicsverse, Higher Ground. As ESG was coming out, she was like the lone voice in the wilderness, crying out and saying, "Hey, we really run the risk of ruining what this is intended to do, where businesses can be a force of good in the world, by turning it into a bunch of greenwashing and making all these claims that are not really substantiated by a true heart for the pursuit of those values." And now no one's talking about ESG unless it's me talking about how there's no ESG anymore. So right. That thing died, but the intention behind it of like strong governance, a strong commitment to the environment. Like, we don't want people dumping chemicals in rivers. That's not a crazy thing, but it gets hijacked, and there is an incentive in place in the investment community or in the business community in general to kind of perform and take it and fall into that sort of short-termism, that short-term thinking trap that ends up ruining a lot of efforts that a lot of people, like the folks that come to these webinars, have. We want to make the world a better place. We want to leave it better for the people who are coming behind us. And so it's important, again, there's some risk in doing a conversation like this because it can be so polarizing, but we really want to kind of tear away and not get caught up into that tribalism, and really kind of dive into what can we do to really bring this culture of integrity forward and really make the impact on our workplaces that is, our mandate. That's the mandate we have.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting, that comment about training too. I of course, I didn't sit through that particular training. I've been in lots of unconscious bias or implicit bias trainings, either conducting them or seeing what other people do. It's interesting because I hope they don't tell folks like, you're biased and you're not, right? What they tell people is, as much as you consciously have no biases and are committed to the idea that everyone should be equal, and I don't want to discriminate against anyone, and I respect everyone, as much as you may consciously think that, the way the human brain works, you can't escape it without getting some bias, right? In some way. We don't all have the same ones, but we can't escape human development without having biases, which is a really interesting thing to think about. Nobody escapes it. So it's not like you're the bad people who are biased and you're the good people who aren't, right? It's like we all have some kind of bias just by virtue of being human. And starting there, we can ask different questions, like, how might I be biased? How might that impact the work? I always tell this one story, which I think makes it so clear. And you might have heard about this. This was some research done with orchestras, right? So if you think back in the 1900s, 1950s, 60s, 70s, the most prestigious orchestras in the country were almost all men, right? And think about the way that they hire someone, right? Person goes up on stage, plays their instrument. There's a jury of people in the audience. They're listening, they're evaluating. They decide whether to hire that person or not. Now you ask those people in the jury, are you trying to hire just men? And what do they say? Of course not. We're the New York Philharmonic. We're trying to be the best orchestra in the world. We don't have time for that nonsense, right? And they're not lying. But then somebody thought, I wonder if there's something unconscious going on. So they put up a big screen and they had people walk in behind the screen and play their instrument. And they thought it would make a big difference. Now, at first it made no difference. I don't know if anyone knows why, put it in the chat. It's really interesting. I'll give you 1 second to see if anyone's heard this before.
Was it like a window screen, like you could see through it, or was it like a true?
You couldn't see through it. Nope. Okay.
Well, that was my guess. I don't know.
Okay. You could still hear high heel shoes that sounded different.
So they made the men wear the high heel shoes then.
So they characterized the person as male or female based on the sounds. Yeah, Emily, you got it. And so then they had people take off their shoes, walk in on a carpet, play the music, and guess what? Just like that, more women got hired because the bias wasn't getting in the way. Now, that doesn't change the equity of the whole situation, right? That doesn't change the fact that you've got to be pretty well off to even get musical instruction to get you to the point where you could be hired for an orchestra, right? That's an equity issue. But it stopped the bias in the moment. And they still do interviews for orchestras like that today because it's such a powerful bias.
Interesting. That's a pretty interesting story. And I think it illustrates how we might have these biases and we might not even know it. We got a great question here from Taisha. So I'd love your perspective on this, Michael. How can we encourage people to keep an open mind after having been convinced that diversity is bad, period, or after having been through a ham-handed diversity training, let's just say? We had a diversity of thought session, not race or gender or identity based, but we received, I can't read that word, never seen that word before. They received a lot of bad comments about having a woke training. So how can we, how can we attack that? Because again, I think all of us want fairness. Like, we as human beings are wired for fairness. Like, I didn't have to teach fairness to my daughters. They know when, you know, I gave my favorite one a bigger piece of the donut. You know what I'm saying? That's in us all. I'm kidding. I don't have a favorite. But like, how do we keep an open mind, and how do we not, you know, again, fall into that tribalism and that sort of like, you know, that taskmaster type thing of like, you know, correcting people who are probably well-intentioned. And, you know, if these biases are unconscious, they might be coming out in ways that there's not like an intentionality behind it. How do we kind of, you know, deconstruct that and really get down to the effectiveness that we're all kind of driving toward?
Yeah, here's two ways that I do it and my team does it, and I think are pretty effective. One is building a deep understanding of what we're talking about. A lot of times we go in and we're like, everybody's got bias, and so we got to do this, this, and this. And it doesn't make sense if you don't already know what's going on. And so we don't assume that people know anything about what we're talking about. We take it back to the basics. I mean, we do sessions on pronouns, for example, where we just start out, what is a pronoun, right? What do the letters in LGBTQIA plus mean, right? We start with the basics and build a deep understanding and a common understanding. And by the time we get done with a session, we're at a similar place in our understanding. And then the solutions make a lot more sense. So I love it. I love it when somebody comes in to a session and I can tell by the look on their face that they do not want to be here, and they kind of think this is going to be a woke session, and they're already defensive or turned off. I love that, because the challenge of getting them to a different place is really exciting for me. The second thing I would say is, and this is where some, I think historically and currently, some practitioners don't really get this right. And some people don't get this right. They might call out people. It might be like, if you don't get it, what's wrong with you? You're a bad person. We're calling people out, right? We're basically excluding them from the conversation. And so what we're looking to do instead is call people in to the conversation. If you don't know about this yet, that's okay. Come on in. We're going to explain it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to connect over it. It doesn't make you a bad person because you don't know about this, but let's have a conversation here. This is inclusive for everyone. We're not trying to exclude some people because we're increasing inclusion for others, right? Inclusion is not a zero-sum game. We can have inclusion for everyone. So calling everyone in. Now, that stuff, that calling out, that shaming people and blaming people, that sometimes happens. That is not the way, I think, today's climate, we do good work in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And, you know, maybe 4% of the population are true psychopaths. Maybe. Like, I'm just saying, like, and I think so much of our job, if we are going to build a true culture of integrity where people feel like their voice can be heard, that's what I just kind of keep coming down to, a true culture of fairness where people, you know, believe that the company's deeds are going to follow its words, and it's a place where they're not going to get knifed in the back because they think different or something like that. Like, that's what a business is. It's a it's a voluntary collective. People voluntarily show up there every day, and people voluntarily push their foot on the gas beyond whatever that minimum level is that it takes to get fired. And if we can maximize that, well, then you get all those positive externalities that come from a true culture of integrity, of more growth, you know what I'm saying? More, lower turnover, higher employee engagement, all those kinds of things. And I just think opening that up and recognizing that there's people have different experiences, people have different backgrounds, people have different views of things. And when we can recognize that, like, our job is really one of influence, which means it's one of understanding the people that we're trying to influence. It should open our minds up as practitioners and as culture enablers to kind of learn to play some new notes or learn to paint with some different colors to really activate this diverse group of, stakeholders.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't mean that we have to be inclusive of harmful actions. If we can't mandate that everybody changes their mind in a certain way or believes a particular thing, but we can mandate certain ways of interacting with our coworkers. And if somebody is not open to interacting respectfully with their coworkers, that's a very different conversation. So
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And, kind of back to this influence thing, I just think, I'm always talking about this inflection point that we're at. I haven't been talking about this inflection point for that long, but it feels like we really have this opportunity to, like, bend the curve on our impact in our organizations. And I think that's going to come down to influence. It's going to come down to how we interact with the business and how we interact with those stakeholders up and down the entire stack, the people on the front lines, the middle managers who can really echo our song and really be those additional lighthouses on the coast, and, leadership. It comes down to influence, and I just don't think we can ever be influential if we can't convince somebody of something. And the odds of me convincing you of something are exponentially lower if you don't think you can convince me of something, which means we have to have a two-way communication. Like, I need to be able to, I need to actually understand you, and you need to feel like I'm trying to understand you. And so again, we can't mandate a lot of these things, but we can create the circumstances, and we can model the kind of respect we want our tribe or our culture to exhibit.
Yeah, and it's really important too to recognize we don't all have the same risk for speaking up about exclusions that are happening in an organization. Some people have been consistently excluded, and so if we're someone who doesn't have the same risk, it's really important for us to try to do something, to try to say something, so that that person who is more at risk doesn't have to be the one always doing it, or the person who's most affected, or the person who's been most excluded or most marginalized. That's why real allyship is really important in organizations. People standing up for their coworkers for real, standing with their coworkers for real, not just like wanting to use the DEI mug and the ally mug and doing it in the ways that are super easy and comfortable, but recognizing that it's sometimes uncomfortable to stand up and when you see something happening that doesn't feel right, or that is excluding someone else, even if it's not happening to us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, we're talking a lot about this, inclusivity piece. And, we run the risk of, or people run the risk of really kind of turning into DEI Pharisees. At the end of the day, it's about effectiveness, and it's about it's about people feeling like my voice can be heard. I'm part of something that's bigger than me, that needs my unique contribution, my unique skill set, or my unique gifts to achieve this mission in a more effective way. There's a really great question here, or a really great kind of comment here from Devin. She said, why? Thank you so much for this thoughtful comment. 15 likes on this one. This is this deserves to be called out here. Why are people so hardened against self-reflection? It's hard to explain why you're against allowing all people to have the same opportunities as all others. Why would anyone be against diversity, equity, and inclusion as concepts? Because they apply to all people and allow everyone to flourish. Plus, the opposite of DEI is discrimination, inequity, and exclusion, DIE, which is what happens to orgs that are truly anti-DEI. Why not flip that conversation to have people defend why they support DIE? What's your response to that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it makes me think of that quote that a few people have said, including Reverend Dr. William Barber. When you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression, right? So it's not just, people are not just having a closed mind, treating everyone equally. They feel like things are becoming not equal for them. And I think that's what causes some of the hardness. And so we really have to work hard to help people understand how inequities have been and are currently happening, for example, right? I mean, sometimes people say, you know, oh, well, DEI work, it went too far, right? It went too far. And here's why we know it didn't go too far, because social scientists can still measure the inequities in our society, whether we're talking about, you know, wealth or housing or incarceration or anything like that. And in our companies, who is feeling excluded, things like that, who is not getting promoted. We can measure all that stuff. It's just social science. And so we know it didn't go too far in terms of actually addressing the problems. And so when people say it went too far, I say maybe some of the performative stuff, but the real work didn't go far enough. We have a lot more to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, our workplaces are still broken. So there's obviously more work to do. I think the best cultures are ones where there's clarity around what's valued and what's not valued. And the people that plug into those or self-select into those cultures, they know what the rules of engagement are and they can exhibit those things. Every culture is not going to be the same. Every company's not going to value those same things. But when there's this performative element in place, or there is this, this heavy-handed, exclusionary, ultimately, conveyance of these conflicts or these concepts, it really does drive conflict and it causes people to disengage. Like, I'm so excited about this space, the ethics space, because we do have the opportunity to really change the direction of the cultures that we are a part of. And if we do it right, where does it ultimately show up? Well, it shows up in the bottom line. It shows up in the enterprise value of the company by way of more authentic, more consistent and sustainable outperformance by the stakeholders, which is rooted in more engagement. But no one's ever going to feel engaged if they don't feel safe. You're never going to have a true relationship with a friend. Boil it down to like a person-to-person level. You're never going to have a true, authentic relationship with a friend if you feel like you don't belong or you don't feel like your voice can be heard. So regardless of what we call it, the essence of what we're trying to achieve should not be lost. We need to figure out better ways, and maybe we can kind of pivot into this, but like we need to figure out better ways that regardless of whether ESG is still in vogue, we still want governance in our organizations. Regardless of whether DEI has like a bad connotation, how do we truly drive toward that like small d diversity, which unlocks so much of that magic?
Yeah, that's great. There's a conversation or a question in the chat, which is really good. And sorry if y'all are asking questions in there and they just fly by. I'm not the best at reading all the comments and speaking at the same time. But I did see this one about recommendations for having a conversation with a DEI team on just how to navigate these executive orders and what it all means and how to continue doing the good work without putting yourself at risk, I think is the nature of the question. And so the recommendations that I have are to really get clarity and read carefully, like what's in the documents that the EEOC puts out, for example. They spell out what is okay and what is not, even in their view, which I would call misinformed. But in that, for example, documents they recently put out, there's this idea that you still can't discriminate against someone because of race or gender or any other protected class. That's still illegal, right? DEI wasn't. And so it just kind of reaffirms what was the case, right? But that's in there. Also in there is that you can't have segregated activities that are excluding certain people. So if we have an ERG, for example, it has to be open to everyone. If we're having a training, it has to be open to people based on their identities, things like that. Can't give preference to one group or another. And so that might mean that things that people were doing to, I know some organizations, whether it was a formal policy or an informal one, had rules about having a certain number of non-white candidates in a pool of interviewees, something like that. But those things can't exist now. But we can remove barriers and increase outreach to places where we don't always advertise our job positions, for example. We can still remove biased words in job descriptions that make it so some people think, yeah, this job is for me, and other people think, no, this job probably isn't for me. We can still work with hiring managers to make sure that the questions are standardized, so some people don't get softball questions because you feel like someone I could relate with and have a beer with, and other people get really hard questions. We can still make it so that the interview process is as inclusive as possible. So I don't go through that process and think, gosh, even if I did get this offer, I wouldn't take it because it doesn't feel like a place where I'm going to be valued. All of those things are still completely possible. And you can go through those EEOC documents and figure that out. There's also a document that was put out by 16 state attorneys general outlining a little bit more about what is completely legal and what that confusion is around that idea of illegal DEI and how that's been misinformed. So all that stuff is available publicly.
So for somebody who feels overwhelmed by the backlash, how can they reframe their commitment to the essence of what we're talking about, which I think is pretty inarguable, regardless of which side you voted on, just to use kind of shorthand. Do you think it's is it sort of a macro approach? Is it a person-to-person approach? How do we sort of deconstruct the misconceptions around this word that has sort of turned into a quote-unquote bad word today, and really focus our efforts on the things that we as human beings, I think, all care about? Belonging, being part of the tribe, like that kind of, connectedness.
Yeah. I wouldn't say tribe, but yeah, I get what you're asking.
It seems like I need some training. Maybe we can talk after.
But yeah, so that sort of is the title that I was thinking, right? With this conversation, drop the word, not the work. There are a lot of people that are dropping the acronym because the acronym itself has just gotten so polarizing, DEI. Some people aren't, right? Some people are like, I'm DEI strong and I'm going to fight this battle to reclaim what that word actually means. Other people are saying, I'll drop the acronym. I'll just spell out what I'm doing. I'll call it diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you have a problem with it, you got to talk to me about the real words and not the acronym. Other people are, changing the words even with more focus on belonging or inclusion or something like that, community, connection. As long as you can continue the work, which again, most Americans agree with, that's great. If you're disheartened because it's disheartening what's happening, and it can be kind of gaslighting and frustrating and painful, I get that. I really get that. I mean, my business has taken a huge hit because of what we do, right? I had federal agency clients with lots of trainings planned out for the year. We had to cancel all that stuff. Man, I had clients that I didn't even realize got federal funding. They canceled what they were doing. I have clients that are just doing that sort of backing away and waiting to see how things play out. And so it can be really hard. There are people laid off, obviously. It can be really hard. And sometimes it can be so overwhelming that it leads to fatalism. Like, what can I do about this? You feel kind of powerless. So I hear you if that's the way you're feeling. With the folks who are doing this work, I'm in lots of communities with them, and we talk about this sort of stuff. So like one of my colleagues said, I think paraphrasing RuPaul, look at the darkness, but don't stare at it. So, you're aware of what's going on, but you're not obsessing. Trying to find joy and the things that make you happy and the people that give you community, the people you can laugh with and vent to and cry with and all those sorts of things. And just continuing the commitment to people and to the work, right? Even if you're frustrated, even if you are a little hopeless, committing and acting for purpose rather than just a blind hope, I think can be helpful. And just especially if you're not super affected, really continuing that allyship, standing up for people, standing with people, connecting with people, listening to people, and trying to focus on the people and the work of the organization, which is DEI falls solidly within all that stuff, whatever you want to call it.
I mean, if we are guardians of our organization, I love that term for if it's HR or it's ethics, it's compliance, like we're guardians of our organization. We're guardians of that culture. That means we're guardians of the people in that culture. And a lot of us are wired for fairness. We self-select into this industry because, like I said earlier, we want to leave it better. And many times that's advocating for others and that's speaking up for others. And I think that is for us to do our jobs well, it takes this high agency approach of changing the world, bending the world to our will, so to speak, and driving things forward. And if that means, giving a voice to the voiceless, then that's what we really need to be leaning into. If we're, what I would say to my question is, if we're faced with that, I think it just comes down to a reframe, because at the core, what we're talking about is something that's inarguable. We want that kind of belonging. We want people to put their gifts to work for our business. We don't want everybody just trying to not get fired. We want people running through the base. We want people putting as close to their all as is healthy for them toward their job and toward making an impact. And I've seen sort of firsthand that sometimes just simply providing another perspective, not beating somebody over the head with it, where all you're really going to get is sort of that fake performative compliance, but rather taking the time to understand their position, their objections or their resistance to whatever we're talking about can often open their mind to another perspective. But it's not, none of this work is easy. Whether DEI existed or not, or the election went one way or another, none of this stuff is easy. And I think when we can take, like, anytime there's like change and volatility, I say this all the time, we tend to focus on the threats because nobody likes change, and change isn't easy. But that's the game, right? Like, these waves are going to keep coming. And I think it's on us to find opportunity in this change, because there's always an equal and opposite, opportunity for any threat that presents itself. So for those of us who are on this call who are feeling kind of discouraged, I would say, get down to the core. Like, what is the core essence of it? And how can you reframe in your engagements or in your interactions with folks and really kind of anchor them back down to this thing that, like, we all care about? I think that can get a lot of stuff unlocked, and can allow us to kind of transcend the sort of polarizing politicalization of this thing that in many cases has become performative at the cost of, the true pursuit, the true heart of, the work, as you call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's super important. And what I mentioned, I was hoping we would get here at the end, but hoping that when people think about this work, to make sure we have fairness and equity and inclusion for everyone, that we've sort of reached into our brains and taken it out of the political bucket and just put it in this is what we do for people, for us. We do it because we value that stuff, and we do it for the organization that we're a part of and that we want to thrive. And so political manipulations can happen, but we're committed and solid in our values and our actions and what we're doing. That's, I hope, where we got to.
We have, I think, a couple of minutes left, and I want one more closing word from you, Michael, because it's always a treat when you're on here. How can organizations, or how can we, in the roles that we're in, resist or fight against this this performative thing? Like, what advice would you have for us who are in those spots?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you've either got folks within your organization who are equipped to understand what equity and inclusion look like in the organization. Maybe you have some data on who's feeling it and who's not. You've got that stuff potentially internally. And so really thinking about, what do you want to change? How do you want to increase inclusion for everyone? How do you want to increase equity for everyone? And getting more invested in doing that work and getting those outcomes than in about what you say and how it appears to everyone else.
Love that.
Not that statements aren't important, right? Sometimes they are. They're sort of leading in the organization, being a steward for all of that good work and for the people. And then there's also being a leader in the world. And sometimes those statements matter too, but really focusing on that. If you don't have the expertise within your organization, there are folks who do this for a living and who do it well, I think. And so reach out and get support that you need so that you can really focus on those outcomes and the people and the work.
Don't lose sight of the hope that you can make an impact. Don't lose sight of the impact that you can make. Reframing a lot of the stuff that we talked about today to fairness is, again, something that's inarguable. Very few people don't care about fairness. We all want fairness. We all want to feel like we're part of the group. Notice I didn't say tribe. How do you like that? See, that's growth. You're seeing real-time growth from me, okay? But this is a constant battle. And like I say, the waves are going to keep coming. Our value is not in our plan. Our value is not in our title or whatever we're positioned or whatever position we're in. Our value is in our ability to plan and our ability to influence. And that comes from trust. You know, Emma had a great quote here, which I'm going to be stealing. Stewardship is a fragile trust. And the key word for stewardship is that trust. We have to establish that trust. And that happens on a person-to-person basis. So let's get one more round of applause for Michael. Yeah. We had a phenomenal emoji exploji. Oh, almost breaking 7,000 today. If you don't get picked, I really would encourage you to check out this book that he wrote, Subtle Acts of Exclusion. It's highly recommended. And I hope you join us next week. We have the one and only Matt Kelly, the coolest guy in compliance, coming on. And we're going to be talking about third party compliant procurement, aligning for third-party risk excellence. So third parties are such an important part of any business. Any business is such a connection of a bunch of different stakeholders. And when we can reduce risk with third parties, we can do a lot to move the needle and de-risk our organization, show our value, and so forth. So bring your friends, bring your wives, bring your husbands, bring everybody you know to the Ethicsverse, and we'll see you next week. Take care.